I do not remember the moment of capture, only the sound of it, the way a scream becomes a line drawn through the air and then cut cleanly, the way noise breaks when the void bites down. One heartbeat, I was a person anchored to soil and gravity, lungs drawing in dust and smoke, and the animal scent of fear, and in the next, I was an arrangement of trembling pieces suspended in a darkness that had weight. The stars were a ceiling punched with holes. Something huge slid past, black on black, and it cast a shadow over the shadow, the only proof that it existed at all. That was how the night ended for me, with a subtraction, not an addition. Something took us away by taking the world away from us. I woke inside a box that could breathe. The walls flexed, not metal, not wood, not any substance I knew. They were slick at my shoulder when I rolled, warm with the warmth of bodies trapped together too long, damp with breath that could not escape. The smell told me more than my eyes. Old blood, new fear, the sourness of panic sweating out of skin, the faint copper of ozone that belongs to machines made by hands that hate the living. There were voices, but they were pared down to their bones. No language remained, only syllables of pleading and cursing, and the little prayer a throat makes when it finds nothing to drink and nothing to swallow. I counted my fingers and found all 10. I pressed my thumb into my palm and felt the glossy bruise of a puncture there, a crescent where a nail had cut, proof I'd struggled against something with teeth. Memory came in pieces. A night siren, a child's cry choked off, the profiling light that sweeps a camp like a searcher's hand sweeping a table for crumbs, the way adult bodies become small when they try to cover smaller ones. Then the sky had ripped, and out of the rip, a shape had unfolded, like a knife pulled from a sheath that never ends. When the box moved, we moved with it, packed together in whatever shape panic made of us. The floor had ridges like ribs, and every time the thing carrying us altered course, those ribs kissed our shins and knees and slid away again. I learned the rhythm of its acceleration. I learned the way the air thickened before a turn. I learned the voice of one of the men near me, and the voice of a woman who had lost hers and only mouthed what she needed, her hands speaking clearer than she could. When the walls pulsed, a cold traveled through them, as if the box exhaled through its pores. I realized then that the box was alive enough to hate us. Sometimes light arrived like a blade pushed between shutters. When it did, it came violet first, then blue, and it cut faces into masks and made eyes into black, wet holes. We looked at one another as creatures look through glass. That light was a promise of elsewhere. None of us knew that elsewhere has its own gravity and its own hunger. Someone began to count the seconds aloud, perhaps to carry time where time was not welcome. He reached 900 before a hand gripped his shoulder and squeezed. He did not count again. The space conspired to keep measure from us. In that conspiracy, I found a steady place inside myself. I recited names I had known, places that had been dull and dear in their dullness, water pumps that leaked, a window that rattled in the wind like a coin in a tin, the patch on the floor where a child's chalk drawings grew and were scrubbed away and grew again. I held those things the way a diver holds breath. There were moments when the motion became too smooth for a ship moving through ordinary space. A quiet folded over the box like a second lid. The pressure shifted in my sinuses. My tongue tasted metal. The first time it happened, a girl began to laugh and could not stop, because the laugh was her lungs remembering joy even as her mind forgot the reason. It turned to sobbing in the fourth breath. Someone comforted her without words. We were generous then, before the first culling, before the machine that delivered food also began to deliver verdicts. A panel overhead quivered open, and something wet fell through. Not food, not water, some sterile gel that burned the throat and filled the stomach with a cold nothing. We drank because there was no other verb to perform. After we had swallowed, the panel remained open just long enough for us to see a shape beyond it. Long fingers, articulated like a spider's legs, but jointed more times than a spider earns, each fingertip haloed with a little corona of electromagnetic fire. The hand petted the air. It did not touch us. It did not need to. It closed the panel like a lid on a coffin. A boy with burnt hair asked, "Are we dead?" Someone answered truthfully, "No." Truth is sometimes the cruelest mercy. When a man farther back began to pray, the words slid off the walls like water off oil. I do not think prayers can climb in places where the material of everything is contempt. We slept in turns that did not exist. The box had no day, no night, merely periods when panic tired, and periods when panic renewed its teeth. When I slept, I dreamt of small pains, because the large one was the water we swam in, a splinter under a nail, a tooth that had wanted pulling for months, the ache in the hip where I'd carried too many bundles of firewood too far. In the dream, the splinter became a stake, and the tooth became a hook, and the ache became a metal rod wired into bone. And when I woke, I couldn't tell whether the dream had been prophecy or memory. The first time one of us died, the box tried to keep the death. A woman's breath hiccuped toward absence and then fell through it. Her body did not stiffen, merely stopped arguing with the floor about the question of weight. There was nowhere to put her, except where she already was. Gently, strangers rearranged themselves around her so that she would occupy the least space she could on her way to becoming an object. She had a string tied around her wrist with a scrap of metal on it. It clicked against the ribs of the floor with the motion of the ship, a small pendulum in a universe that had no patience for clocks. We did not speak her name. None of us knew it. The girl who had laughed plaited the dead woman's hair because it gave her hands a job they could do that was not tearing. When the panel opened again, and the hand reached in to offer its cold rations, the fingers paused over the dead woman's face, curious. The little halos flickered, the hand withdrew, the panel closed. The box did not breathe for 3 heartbeats, then it did, and the air came in colder than before. Perhaps that was a kind of funeral. The second death was loud and was punished. A man hammered at the wall with the heel of his hand and shouted the name of a child he had not found since the night broke. He shouted it until his voice was a strip of meat, until his hand was a slab we could smell. The panel opened not to feed us, but to deliver a coil of something humming like an angry insect. It darted. He stiffened, eyes wide, mouth wider. The sound trapped inside him like a fly trapped inside a bottle. When it ended, he was not dead. He wished he was. The coil paused in the open panel like a snake uncertain which animal to strike next. Then it was gone. We breathed again because the box permitted it. That was when I learned the rules. It wanted us quiet, docile, alive enough to hurt, not alive enough to try to become history. The box, and whatever guided it, had no interest in our stories, except as a marinade. I measured my strength like a miser counting coins. I made trades with myself. You can cry when you sleep. You can rage when they cannot hear you. I worked my shoulders against the slick wall to discover if any seam would yield. There was one, where panels met. It quivered when the ship entered the knot space that tasted like metal. I pressed my nail into it until the nail bent back and bled. When I tasted that blood, I was surprised by its warmth, by the proof that something in the world still belonged to me. The taste had salt and iron, and a little bitterness of old fear dissolved in it. We passed through a door I could not see. I knew it because the world changed its mind about distance. The box dropped and rose without moving. The air thickened and thinned without changing pressure. I felt as if a hand, the size of a city, had reached down and rotated me a quarter turn to the left, inside my own skin. The others felt it too. A child vomited, and the vomit went nowhere except onto the floor and then onto the knees of people who had no room to move away from what was happening. The smell of it rode the air like a small animal. A man near me whispered a word I did not know. He said it as if it had once meant home. It had many syllables, and they wound around each other like braids. I asked him what it meant. He said, "It means a harbor." Then he laughed softly and said, "But there are no harbors here." Light returned, stronger, a band of it that crawled around the seam where the ceiling met the wall, a ring preparing to become a mouth. The box slowed, its ribs shivered. We stacked ourselves as well as we could in anticipation of a new motion, and the motion that came was turning. The floor became a wall, and then a ceiling, and then had the decency to become a floor again, but at a different angle than before, as if the box had decided that we stood wrong and needed correction. The panel opened, and the hand returned, and this time it was followed by a face. I say face because it had the arrangement commonly agreed upon. Eyes, mouth, the curve where a cheek yields to a jaw. But it was a face that wore elegance like armor, a face that knew itself to be the end product of 1,000 generations of breeding and cruelty. The eyes were wrong. They were too clean, as if they had been washed with alcohol and stored in velvet when not in use. The mouth smiled with the left half, and did not, with the right. The hair hung like fabric woven from night. The collar around the throat grew from the throat. Jewelry had invaded flesh and set up kingdoms there. The face peered in at us and nodded as a buyer nods at livestock. It spoke a word that made the air feel thinner. The hand fitted a mask over the opening and something hissed. The box equalized with the world outside with the sigh that accompanies surrender. A seam split vertically. The box unscrolled into a corridor that did not feel like a corridor because there was no above in it and no below. We had to teach our feet to believe the floor could be trusted. They learned. Feet learn what heads cannot. The corridor wore knives for decoration. Not literally though, there were plenty of literal blades, thin as thoughts, wide as oars, serrated, smooth, curved like claws, straight like ideals, but everything in that place had the knife's intention. Beams interlaced overhead in patterns that made the eyes want to count them and fail. Panels breathed in and out with a rhythm calibrated to unsettle. The light arranged itself into planes that did not match the weight of bodies walking through them. When sound came, it came from directions that did not exist. We shuffled. The man who had prayed limped because his foot had gone numb. The girl who had laughed kept her hands tight to her stomach, as if protecting something fragile that would not survive the sight of the corridor. The woman whose wrist tag had clicked on the box floor now clicked against her own hip. The boy with burn-scorched hair had learned the lesson of watching. He watched with his jaw set, his eyes older than his bones. The creatures that had taken us wore themselves like art. They passed along the corridor singly or in pairs, gliding, their steps so exacting they seemed choreographed. Some looked at us as if we were a kind of weather, and they were not sure if they liked rain. Some did not look at all. One slowed, inhaled, and smiled with its eyes closed, savoring our terror like a perfume sample. I tried to make my fear small to deny it their pleasure. I discovered there is a way to breathe that makes no sound. I practiced it as if it were a prayer that might be heard by something that did not hate me. We came to a junction where the corridor opened into something like a plaza, except plazas belong to cities that remember Sunday. This place had height but not sky, breadth but not space. Balconies oversaw the open like predators watching a watering hole. On those balconies, figures reclined, draped in hues that were not colors so much as injuries to the notion of color, their laughter scissoring the air. Below, cages hung at different heights, each with an occupant. The cages turned, gently, so that the faces inside rotated to present all their facets to the gazes above. Some faces were awake, some were no longer faces. Some had mirrors suspended opposite them so that the last thing the person could see was the shape of their own outline folding into something unrecognizable. I learned in that instant that cruelty is a geometry with its own saints. An overseer taller, elegant, like a blade, balanced point down on a mirror, gestured. We were told to halt without words. The air itself communicated command. There is a kind of authority that never raises its voice because it has never had to. The face we had first seen descended a flight of steps and stood before us, smiling its half-smile. It spoke in our language in a voice that had been carved into shape by tutors who hated vowels. "Welcome," it said. "Be grateful you arrived alive. We prefer a long conversation." No one replied. A reply would have seemed like collaboration in our own sentencing. I lifted my eyes because shame cannot be escaped by lowering the head. The face watched me watch it. Interest settled over it, like dust over a valuable object. It reached out one long finger. It did not touch my face. It traced the void between my cheek and the air near it, as if mapping a future scar. "Look," the face said to someone I could not see. "This one's fear leaves such pretty patterns in the skin." A thrill rippled through the balconies. I made my breath small again. The face laughed, but not at me. At itself, perhaps. At the ease with which it could be monstrous and precise simultaneously. It snapped its fingers, a gesture that turned motion into music, and everything moved. Hands as light as intention and as strong as history fell on us. We were parted into groups. Straps found wrists. Hooks found loops I had not known were sewn into my clothes. When I resisted, I learned how much of me belonged to my muscles and how much belonged to the rules of this place. The rules owned most of me. I was led to a cage that had already learned the shape of a human body. It remembered us as a species. It remembered how our knees bend and did not. It remembered the angle at which a spine can be made to confess. They closed me inside. The door sealed with a sound that will follow me into every dream I am granted. A click that was also an edict. A chain hummed, the cage lifted. The floor fell away until floor was merely a memory of how one lives, and I was a hanging thing. From this height, the plaza was a diagram. Things consumed and the architecture built to facilitate consumption. I could not see the other captives now, only the tops of heads, the glitter of eyes on balconies, the thin arc of a blade catching light where there should be no light. Beneath me, figures moved with instruments in their hands. Not tools, tools help. These were devices made for the precise application of meaninglessness. A table rolled into a pool of light, the way a coffin slides into a grave. Someone strapped to it made sounds I did not know a mouth could make. The room applauded, a delicate patter like rain beginning on a roof, and then the applause died because the scream improved. Every improvement delights an audience. Time fractured then. I could count the fractures. Each was a moment that took a little of me and kept it. A needle hummed nearby, until the hum scaled into a shriek. When it touched skin that was not mine, a scent rose that tasted like pennies. A blade whispered against something taut, and the whisper resolved into a chord with 4 notes, each note a different vein's cry. A laugh sailed upward to touch the underside of my cage. It had the texture of silk and the temperature of dry ice. I remember telling myself the truth. You will not be brave all the time. You will be brave in the gaps. Hide your bravery there, in the little intervals between one humiliation and the next. I looked for those intervals, as a thirsty person looks for shade. I found one in the way the chain creaked lazily while the cage turned, letting me show different angles of my face to the balconies. I found another in the cheap miracle of my own heartbeat, unaffected by the opera below except to persist because that is its only talent. When thirst became its own kind of pain, a thin tube uncoiled from the cage's ceiling and offered wetness. I waited for it to show its second face and become a stinger. When it did not, I drank. The water slid through me as if my throat had been lined with glass. I thanked nothing for it, because gratitude here felt like a kind of surrender they could scent. Still, some part of me, a superstitious, petty, human part, whispered thanks to a version of the universe that might someday care, as if any such thing could be persuaded by politeness. I slept. The body is insubordinate. It will sleep even in the presence of theatre if exhaustion coerces it. I dreamed of an ordinary street I used to walk down to fetch bread, and in the dream the shopkeeper had Drukhari hands, and the loaf bled when I cut it. I woke to the sight of someone I had arrived with being applauded for his performance of dying. The applause was not mockery. It was appreciation. They loved what he'd given them. I hated them for the purity of that love. When my cage descended at last, it felt like being forgiven by the wrong God. The floor met my feet, and my legs failed the test of belief for an instant before they agreed to be legs again. 2 figures approached, taller than any human, but not heavy. Their movement had the logic of water poured down a surface, designed to make water's path beautiful. Between them was a frame, like a doorway that had been translated into a different language and then translated back wrong. They gestured. I went where they intended me to go. I had learned that refusal is a currency too expensive to spend early. The frame smelled like lightning. When they pushed me through it, my skin shrank as if to climb inside me to hide. Something invisible brushed the inside of my bones. I gasped because breath was a thing my body did when struck with sudden cold. On the other side of the frame, the air tasted faintly sweet, like fruit left too long on a windowsill. I realized the sweetness was me. The frame had stripped something from the surface of my skin, the catecholamines that fear paints us with, and the air was licking them away. The room they delivered me to pretended it was a cell out of kindness. It had a bed. It had a basin with water in it. It had a small mirror. It had a light that dimmed when I spoke, a word that meant nothing, and brightened when I spoke another word that also meant nothing. A trick, a pet's illusion of control. The mirror showed me a face that had learned a new geography. There were fine tremors in the muscles near the eyes, a constant little quake announcing a country at war with itself. I did not touch my own cheek because I did not want to give the mirror that intimacy. The door did not lock. It did not have to. I was the lock. I sat on the bed that was softer than most mercy and waited without deciding to. All waiting is a decision we pretend was made for us. When the door opened again, the face from the corridor stood there, gloved now, smiling its measured smile. "You will last," it said. "I have a use for those who last." I asked, because words are a weapon that can sometimes cut the speaker, "What do you call this place?" Its head tilted, a candor so practiced it had become a second nature. "Comorra," it said, "the only city that never dies because it feeds on death." The name sat in my mouth like a shard of glass. I swallowed it because there was nowhere else to put it. The face watched that, saw the tiny movement of my throat, and nodded, satisfied the way a carpenter is satisfied when a piece he has shaved slides snugly into its slot. It touched a panel near the door, and the light changed color, shifting towards something colder than blue. "Sleep," it suggested. "Tomorrow you will be taught the value of pain." I did not answer. When it left, the door remained ajar a little while, as if to let fear draft in. Then it sealed with a sigh. I lay down on the bed and held my hands flat on either side of me so that I would not curl them into fists and break them on the softness. I tried to think of the old street and the bread and the way morning used to smell when it belonged to people like us. I thought instead of the box and the panel, and the hand, with the small halos at the fingertips, and the way that hand had petted the air as if it petted the idea of us. Sleep came because it always comes. It is a tyrant kinder than most. Before I fell through it, I told myself a truth and made it a promise. Remember the names you do not know. Remember the geometry of the plaza, and the tilt of the cage, and the temperature of the water, and the sound of the door, and the way the light arranges itself around cruelty. Remember because memory is the only possession they have not yet figured out how to auction. Remember because someday remembering might be all of you that survives. In the dark, the room shared with me the little noises all rooms make when they think no one is listening. A soft click, the sigh of a vent, the whisper of a seam settling. Somewhere far away, a crowd delighted in a noise someone made while being broken. Here, very near, a muscle in my jaw clenched and unclenched on its own, rehearsing. I named the muscle courage to see if it would grow. It did not, but it did not quit either. When I slept, the void came back to fetch me to the place where the ship had changed the rules of distance. It took me only to the threshold and left me there, as if to say, "Step through again, properly this time, now that you know what is on the other side." I stood at the edge of the rip in the sky and felt wind pour outward and inward at once. The wind smelled like knives washed in cold water. I stepped. I woke with my heart running. The mirror watched me waking, and for a moment I thought I saw, not my reflection, but another face looking back mine. Yes, but older by an hour and a year. A caution delivered without words. When I blinked, it was only glass again. Morning is a lie in Comorra, but they have a version of it. The lights brightened. Somewhere a bell chimed, a single note that found my bones and took up residence there. The door opened to receive me, and I went because the alternative was a cage from which going would no longer be a verb I could perform. In the corridor, figures glided. In the distance, the plaza hummed. In the air, the taste of sweetness returned, faint as a rumor. I kept my breath small and put one foot in front of the other and told myself again, "Remember." Then I walked into the lesson and let the city begin to speak its language through my nerves. There is no sunrise in Comorra. The light comes from wounds cut into the air itself, fissures that bleed radiance instead of blood, illuminating towers that should not stand and shadows that should not move. When the door of my cell opened, the first breath I took belonged to that place, and it was like swallowing perfume distilled from venom. They made us walk single file along a bridge that had no visible beginning or end. Beneath it hung a void that shimmered as if filled with drowned stars. Above it, spires stabbed into darkness so vast it seemed hollow. The city was infinite in every direction, built not for comfort but for demonstration, each surface polished enough to show us how small we were. The air hummed. The hum had notes that belonged to pain rather than to music. The escorts glided ahead, Drukhari soldiers, their armor blacker than thought, trimmed in silver that drank light. I learned quickly that they did not walk so much as drift, a controlled fall forward that made motion appear effortless. Behind them, we, humans, trophies, merchandise, shuffled like a single wounded organism. Chains linked our wrists. The sound of them was the only honest sound here. Even the echoes seemed rehearsed. From somewhere high above came a chorus. Laughter, thin and musical, the kind that could slice. I looked up and saw balconies crowded with silhouettes noble Drukhari watching the procession. Their attention felt like sunlight magnified through glass, focused on ants. One threw something a petal, or maybe a flake of skin gilded to resemble one, and it spiraled down until it landed in my hair. It was warm. I brushed it away, and it stuck to my fingers, soft as ash, wet as guilt. We crossed into a district that changed the color of air. The violet haze thickened to turquoise. Walls pulsed faintly, alive with veins of light. The ground beneath the bridge turned from void to mirror, reflecting not what was above, but what was desired to be seen. In my reflection, I was already thinner, paler, beginning to resemble the things that owned me. They called this district the Galleries of Breath. Every few steps, new cages appeared suspended from invisible wires, each containing a body arranged into a work of anatomy. Some still breathed, which was part of the art. Tubes carried their exhalations into glass orbs, where the vapor condensed into shimmering liquids. A Drukhari artisan moved among them with brushes of silver filament, painting sigils onto the glass with their captives' condensed breath. Beauty and agony braided together until they became indistinguishable. I learned that in Komara, suffering is not punishment, it is currency. The more exquisite the torment, the richer the owner. Even pain must have taste here. We halted before a gate that resembled an opened ribcage of a giant long dead. Between each bone shimmered a membrane like stretched oil. Beyond it lay what the guards called the Market of Lel. The name tasted of laughter. The gate sighed as they parted, and the smell of iron and spice and burnt perfume hit like a blow. The market lived and breathed. Stalls of ivory and obsidian lined the streets, each glowing with faint bioluminescence. Merchants did not shout. They murmured, their words twined with psychic suggestion that slipped under the skull like a thief. They sold everything that could feel humans, xenos, animals, hybrids, each posed for display. Chains hummed with faint electrical currents to keep hearts beating at the right tempo of despair. We were led to the center plaza, where the auction spire rose like a single black tooth. The base was carved with reliefs depicting battles fought centuries before mankind's birth. Every face in those carvings was screaming. Some screamed in stone, some screamed still. I remember how the air shimmered with energy as the Archon arrived. The Drukhari parted as if a blade cut through their ranks without touching them. Archon Vethril moved like something that had never known gravity. His armor gleamed darkly, ornamented with chains of crystal containing shapes that shifted too slowly to be reflections. His eyes pale as the inside of a cut gemstone surveyed us not as bodies, but as compositions. When he spoke, his voice did not travel through the air. It arrived directly in the bones, a whisper carved from pleasure and boredom. "New stock," he said. "Still warm, still afraid. Fear keeps the flavor alive." A witch beside him, her skin translucent enough to show veins like silver rivers, laughed softly. "They will dull quickly, my lord. Perhaps the homunculi will have better use." "Perhaps," he answered, though his gaze lingered on me longer than comfort could tolerate. "That one has a particular resonance. Look how the mind fights, even as the body obeys." He gestured, and a guard marked my collar with light, a sigil that burned cold. Ownership written in the spectrum of pain. I did not cry out. The scream stayed where pride told it to stay. His smile deepened, satisfied. "This one remembers silence. We may keep him intact for now." Around us, the auction continued. Voices speaking, prices, measured not in numbers, but in sensations. The memory of a first wound. 3 nights of terror harvested from a dying moon. Every bid was a cruelty disguised as art, and we were the canvases. As we were herded again, I began to notice the city's rhythm. Komara pulsed. The walls beat faintly like hearts. Every structure, no matter how still, vibrated with stored anguish. The air's pressure rose and fell in slow waves, as if the city itself breathed through its inhabitants. I realized then that Komara was not built, it was grown, cultivated like a tumor that had learned to enjoy itself. We were taken through tunnels that spiraled downward until up and down lost meaning. The deeper we went, the quieter the laughter became, replaced by a hum of industry. Sparks lit the corridors, smiths forging weapons that screamed softly with each hammer strike, artisans sewing new skins for nobles who had grown bored with theirs. Everywhere, creation existed only to glorify destruction. When we reached the lowest platform, the air was cold enough to crystallize breath. Here the slaves slept standing, shackled to vertical frames that fed them dreams engineered to drain hope. A Drukhari overseer explained in a voice like silk tearing, "Dreams are fuel, hope is energy wasted. We reclaim it." I watched as a man near me convulsed. From a device attached to his skull, glowing mist poured into a collector jar. The overseer smiled at the efficiency. Every emotion is a resource. Even despair can light a room. They installed us in such frames. When the restraint clasped my wrists, needles entered veins with the delicacy of lovers. I could feel my own memories begin to soften around the edges, becoming malleable. The machine whispered inside my skull, replaying the voice of my mother, the warmth of sunlight, then bleeding those images until they collapsed into static. Somewhere behind the static, I heard the overseer purr. "Yes, remember then forget. That is how you become valuable." I do not know how long I hung there. In Komorra, time has no proper name. The lights shift, not for day and night, but for appetite and spectacle. At some unseen signal, the restraints opened. My knees buckled. I fell onto a floor slick with condensation. A shadow detached itself from the wall, another Drukhari, but different. Taller, cloaked, his armor decorated with runes that seemed to move when not observed. He regarded me with mild curiosity. "Archon Vethril requires his purchase," he said. "You will walk." I followed him through corridors narrower than thought, past rooms humming with whispers that were not human. Once, a door slid open enough for me to glimpse inside. A creature with too many eyes wept into a chalice, while two Drukhari debated the purity of its sorrow. The door closed before the scream escaped. At last we emerged into open air, or what pretended to be air. Above us spread a dome of translucent membrane that trapped storms within it. Lightning crawled along its surface like veins of living mercury. The dome lit the city below in pulses, dark, then bright, then darker still. In that strobing light, Komorra revealed its full cruelty. Towers connected by bridges of bone and light, cathedrals whose stained glass depicted not saints but exquisite dismemberments, avenues lined with statues that were not statues. Ships floated on invisible currents between spires, sleek and insectile, their hulls dripping with chains. The city stretched forever, feeding on itself. Every scream somewhere became music somewhere else. I asked myself then, what powered all this? What engine could keep such a monstrosity alive? The answer came in sensation, not reason. It was us. The billions captured, bled, flayed, and remembered only as notes in a grand composition of agony. Komorra thrived because we did not die fast enough. The Drukhari guide stopped before a structure shaped like a fang turned upside down. Its entrance was a slit of light. Two guards stood motionless, their faces hidden behind mirrored helms that reflected my exhaustion back at me. The guide spoke a phrase that fluttered in my ears like the wings of insects. The slit widened. "Enter," he commanded. Inside, temperature vanished. The air neither warmed nor cooled. It simply was a perfect nothing. The corridor ahead was lined with mirrors, each showing me at a different age, a different stage of surrender. Some showed me kneeling, some fighting, one smiling with blood on my teeth. I turned from that one quickly. It lingered longer than it should have. At the corridor's end waited Archon Vethril. Without armor now, draped in fabrics that shimmered like oil on water, he sat on a throne made from interlocking blades that moved minutely with each of his breaths. Above him, suspended from golden hooks, hung crystal orbs containing drifting motes of light. I knew, without needing to be told, that each mote was a soul. The room smelled faintly of burnt sugar and iron. "You have seen my city," he said, voice smooth as venom. "What do you think of her?" I answered before thinking. "She is alive." He smiled. "Yes, she feels. She remembers. Every brick was laid with a memory of pain. Every tower sings with it. That is why she endures. Empires fall because they hope. We endure because we despair correctly." He rose and approached, footsteps soundless. When he was close enough that I could see the fine dust of souls clinging to his eyelashes, he tilted his head. "Tell me your name." I gave it, He repeated it as if tasting a rare spice. A short name, easy to carve into bone. You may keep it for now. He touched my forehead with one clawed finger. The touch burned cold, searing through skin into memory. Images burst behind my eyes. Oceans inverted, stars screaming as they were eaten, faces I did not know, laughing as they died. Then it ended. My knees gave way. He watched me fall the way a scholar watches ink dry. "Remember this city," he murmured. "Everything you are belongs to it now. Even what you forget will return to serve her." Guards dragged me away before I could answer. As they pulled me through the doorway, I looked back once. The Archon was already turning toward another prisoner, repeating the ritual, his words perfectly measured. In Comorra, even cruelty must be consistent. Outside, the storm above the dome shifted color, from silver to red. Thunder rolled without sound. The city answered in flickers of light, as if the architecture itself shuddered with pleasure. Somewhere below, a choir began to sing voices, not in harmony, but in exquisite dissonance, a song without end. That was the first night I understood what eternal meant. Not endless time, but the absence of conclusion. In Comorra, even suffering does not finish. It only refines itself. I was taken back to the lower quarters, to a cell that was no longer the same as before. Now it whispered. The walls recited fragments of words spoken by other captives, looping them until they lost shape. I sat in that whispering dark and thought of the city above its impossible spires, its mirrors, its laughter. I thought of the Archon's words. We despair correctly, and for the first time, I began to understand that despair here was not defeat. It was obedience. And obedience was the only form of life Comorra allowed. That was how my lessons began. Not with chains, but with the slow education of the soul. How to scream beautifully, how to suffer with rhythm, how to make despair sing. And above it all, Comorra breathed each exhalation a prayer, each inhalation a promise that none of us would ever be forgotten. Because forgetting is a mercy, and mercy does not live here. I used to think there was a difference between noise and silence. Comorra taught me that both can hurt the same way. The cell that held me now had no doors, only walls that opened when commanded. I never saw who gave the order, only the shift of air before the wall dissolved into mist and the guards stepped through. They didn't speak. Their movements were choreographed to the same rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire city. When they came for me, I felt it before I saw them. The floor trembled faintly, as if something massive far below was breathing. The walls flickered, displaying shadows of my own posture one heartbeat behind, as though the cell itself was rehearsing my obedience. Then the mist parted, and I was told, in a voice colder than metal, "You will walk into the light. Do not look away." The light was not light. It was a wound, a vertical slit carved into the air. I stepped through and found myself surrounded by sound, roaring, layered, rising from 1,000 throats. It hit with physical force, pressing against the ribs until my lungs forgot how to breathe. I was in the arena of knives. The space was impossible in scale. A hollow sphere suspended within the city's underbelly. The walls shimmered like wet glass, shifting with the reflections of its audience. The stands were filled with Drukhari, thousands of them each, a perfect silhouette of contempt, their laughter orchestrated into harmony. Above them hung banners made from flayed skin, translucent and trembling in the artificial wind. Each bore the sigil of a witch cult, painted in the blood of yesterday's spectacle. The floor beneath me was bone-polished, sculpted, and alive. When I took a step, it flexed slightly, as if enjoying the contact. Other slaves stood nearby, dozens of us, arranged in lines like offerings. Some wept, some prayed, some merely stared upward, as if the sky above us still existed somewhere beyond this dome. The air smelled of copper and perfume and ozone. The perfume was stronger. At the center of the arena was a platform that rose from below with a sound like a blade unsheathing. Upon it stood the succubus, the mistress of this cult. She wore no armor, only ribbons of living cloth that moved like predators around her limbs. Her skin shone with sweat and someone else's blood. In her hand was a weapon that resembled a spine still twitching. The crowd fell silent as she raised it. When she spoke, her voice filled every ear, not through echo, but through direct intrusion, a whisper placed inside the mind. Today, she purred, we are blessed by Archon Vethril himself. He gifts us a song freshly tuned, eager to learn pain. We shall hear how well the flesh of the Monkey can scream. The audience cheered with the discipline of worshippers. I realized the song she spoke of was us. One by one, the slaves were dragged forward to perform their part. Some were armed with dull blades, others with nothing. Their opponents were Drukhari gladiators in masks shaped like laughing skulls. It wasn't combat, it was theater. The outcome had already been written. When my turn came, I didn't resist. Resistance here was just another form of rhythm they enjoyed. The guards placed something in my hand, a shard of glass, thin as a thought. It cut my palm immediately. I felt the blood slide down my wrist, warm and slow. Across from me, a witch stepped forward, smiling as if greeting a lover. Her movements were liquid elegance, her body painted in patterns that pulsed faintly with each heartbeat. "Run," she said softly. "Make me remember you." I didn't run. I stood still. Something inside me had broken days ago, or weeks' time no longer mattered. I looked at her, at the perfection of her form, and realized she was everything this city admired. Discipline, cruelty, artistry. To fight her would be to acknowledge her rules. So I dropped the shard. The sound of it shattering was absurdly loud. The crowd went silent. For a heartbeat, I thought perhaps I had done something sacred. Then the laughter began soft at first, then spreading, blooming like infection. The witch tilted her head, intrigued. "You do not wish to sing?" "I have no song left," I said. My voice surprised me. It sounded calm. She smiled, not unkindly. "Then you will be the silence between the notes." Her weapon struck faster than thought. I remember the pain only as color, white turning to black, then red. When I woke, I was not dead. I was somewhere colder. The laboratory of Homunculus Xerath was nothing like the arena, and yet it was worse. Where the arena celebrated destruction, this place studied it. The walls were transparent, filled with fluid that glowed faintly from within. Shadows drifted through those tanks, human shapes distorted by the water, floating in perfect stillness until a pulse of light made them twitch. Some were whole, others reduced to single organs suspended on silver threads. The sound here was not laughter, but the quiet drip of eternity. I was strapped to a table that curved to fit the spine. Chains didn't hold me, needles did, thousands of them, thin as hair, connecting me to the machine beneath. It breathed in sync with me, or made me breathe in sync with it. I could no longer tell which. When I tried to move, I felt my own muscles resist. Something had replaced obedience with paralysis. Then he appeared. Xerath, the Homunculus. He emerged not from a doorway, but from the wall itself, as though he had been a part of it, waiting. His body was a tapestry of scars and augmentations. Tubes coiled from his back into the ceiling, feeding him fluids that shimmered with colors unnamed. His hands were long, each finger ending in a different instrument, a scalpel, a claw, a needle, a quill. He moved like thought impossible to anticipate. He regarded me with eyes that had no pupils, only swirling layers of mirrored glass. When he spoke, it was almost tender. "You lived. How inconveniently strong the human design can be, but not elegant, never elegant." He traced a line down my chest with one metallic finger. Wherever he touched, skin parted painlessly, opening like petals. Blood welled, but did not fall. It hung in the air, suspended by invisible threads. He leaned close, studying the wound with an artist's patience. The succubus was right. Silence has its uses. You do not fight the knife. You listen to it. He inserted a device into the wound, a serpent of glass that slithered beneath the skin. I felt it exploring, coiling around ribs, tasting nerves. My body trembled, but it was not entirely from fear. There was a strange clarity to the pain, clean, focused. It erased thought, leaving only perception. Xerath watched me shiver and smiled faintly. "You feel that? The body begging to redefine itself. This is the threshold of understanding. You should be honored. Few Monkey are allowed to learn their anatomy from the inside." He withdrew the serpent and replaced it with light, a beam that cauterized the wound with precision, finer than mercy. The smell of burning flesh filled the room, sweet and wrong. I waited for him to continue, but instead he gestured, and the table tilted upward, forcing me to face the tanks behind him. Inside them floated others, humans, xenos, creatures I could not name. Some had been fused together, limbs merging into architecture. One had eyes where its lungs should be. Another's skin was transparent, its veins pulsing like roots. They were alive. Xyrath gestured toward them, as a teacher might toward students. "They are my hymns," he said. "Each one a verse of suffering sung to perfection. You will join them soon, but first you must learn the refrain." He moved to a console and adjusted something. A surge of heat flowed through the needles in my flesh. My body convulsed, not from pain, but from the memory of pain. It was as if every wound I had ever suffered reopened in unison: cuts, burns, the blow that brought me here, all relived in a single instant. I screamed, but no sound came. My throat was frozen, my voice stolen for study. When it ended, he looked almost proud. "You see? The flesh remembers what the mind denies. That is why we collect bodies. Minds forget too easily." I tried to speak, but only managed a rasp. "Why? Me?" He tilted his head. "Because you survived the arena without a scream. You refused their rhythm. Silence offends them, but it intrigues me. Silence means potential. It means space to sculpt." He pressed a hand against my chest again, and I felt a pulse, not mine, but his. Through the contact, images flooded me. Memories that were not mine, worlds burning, Drukhari ships harvesting, laughter that echoed between dimensions. Beneath it all, a hunger so vast it felt holy. He withdrew his hand, and I realized he had left something inside me, a thread of alien energy that still pulsed faintly beneath the skin. "You will carry this," he said. "A seed of perfection. It will grow, reshape you. When it blossoms, I will return to harvest what you become." He turned away, losing interest. Assistants grotesques stitched from countless donors approached to unhook the needles. As they released me, my body slumped but did not fall. The floor rose to catch me like a lover. My skin burned with patterns of light, lines of infection tracing my veins. I could feel my heartbeat sinking with something larger, the pulse of Komara itself. They dragged me to a cell adjoining the lab. It was small, filled with the sound of slow dripping. On one wall hung a mirror of dark glass. At first, I thought it reflected me, but the movements were slightly delayed. Then I realized it wasn't a reflection, it was another person, another experiment, mimicking me through some shared nervous system. When I lifted my hand, they did the same. When I clenched my fist, they cried out. That was when I began to lose track of which side of the glass I was on. Days or hours passed. My wounds closed too quickly. The thread inside me had changed the rhythm of healing. I felt stronger, but also less human. Hunger no longer came as appetite, but as vibration, a craving in the nerves rather than the stomach. Sometimes I could hear whispers in my blood, echoing voices of those floating in Sirath's tanks. They spoke without words, sharing sensations, the pressure of knives, the warmth of extraction, the ecstasy of transformation. I began to understand their language, pain arranged into meaning. When the homunculus returned, he seemed pleased. "You are learning. Already your nervous system resonates with the frequencies of the city. You are adapting. Do you still fear me?" I wanted to answer yes. Instead, I found the truth. "No, I fear forgetting." He leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of embalming oils. "Then you are ready." He brought a vial of liquid light and poured it over my chest. It sank into the skin like water into paper. Instantly, visions flooded me, endless corridors of Komara, the arena, the market, the city breathing through every soul. I saw how pain linked them, how every scream traveled upward to feed the towers like prayer. And I understood. The Drukhari did not worship gods. They were the gods, each one sustained by the devotion of agony. When the vision ended, I was on the floor. My hands glowed faintly, veins outlined in silver. Sirath's voice drifted from somewhere above. "Do not thank me. Gratitude is for the living. You are beyond that now." He left, leaving me alone with the whispering of my altered blood. I touched my chest where the light had entered and felt something pulsing beneath a second heart. Slower, deeper, waiting. I thought of the arena again, of the witch who told me to run. I remembered the shard of glass, the moment I refused to sing. Perhaps that had been the first act of freedom I'd ever known. Here, in this city of unending torment, silence might be the only rebellion left. I closed my eyes and listened to the machine's hum, the fluids drip, the faint throb of Comora outside. It all merged into a single rhythm. For the first time, I understood why they called this place the City of Eternal Pain. Pain was not an interruption of life, it was the language life spoke here. Every heartbeat, every exhale, every scream was part of the same conversation. And somewhere inside that symphony, my own silence began to sound like a note. It began with a tremor so small that I mistook it for fear. My fingers twitched against the floor, and the motion rippled upward through bone and sinew, like something remembering how to wake. For hours I lay still, counting the intervals between heartbeats, listening to the steady drip of fluids in the dark. The sound no longer comforted. It measured the distance between what I had been and what I was becoming. The homunculus's seed, the thread he had buried inside my chest, had taken root. At first it pulsed in rhythm with my breath, a parasite imitating prayer. Then it began to set its own tempo. Each throb left after images behind my eyes, flashes of light too bright for a room without lamps, silhouettes moving within me as though my organs had learned to cast shadows. When I touched the place above my sternum, the skin felt warm and strangely soft, as if the flesh beneath were no longer content to remain hidden. I tried to sleep. Sleep came as fever. I dreamed of corridors made of skin and glass, of voices crawling across the walls, whispering in languages that were not learned but inherited. I walked through those corridors barefoot. Each step left prints that writhed and closed behind me. When I reached the end, I found a mirror, and the mirror breathed. "We are awake," it said. "We are you, divided too long." I woke gasping. The cell's dark glass reflected only a smear of motion, mine, but not entirely. For a heartbeat, the reflection smiled when I did not. Then it stilled, and I wondered whether I was seeing a future or a delay. The next time the guards came, I felt them before they appeared. Their presence pressed on my nerves like static before a storm. The wall opened, and they entered with their usual silence, carrying a frame of black metal. I did not struggle when they bound me to it. Struggle had become ritual, and rituals have no power once you see the pattern. The frame hummed, lifting me from the floor, carrying me back through the corridor towards Syrath's laboratory. The path was different this time. We passed through chambers. I had not seen vaults filled with suspended skeletons that pulsed faintly, as if their bones stored memory. The air was warm and metallic. Sparks drifted downward from conduits above, and where they landed on my skin, they did not burn. They sank in. Each left behind a brief taste, bitterness, sweetness, the ghost of some alien spice. I realized I was sampling the city itself through my pores. When the laboratory doors unfolded, the scent hit like thunder. Antiseptic and rot, perfume and ozone. Girath stood over a table, surrounded by assistants, his grotesques, stitched from dozens of lives, faces rearranged into mosaics of obedience. On the table lay what had once been a man. His chest was open like a book. The homunculus studied the pages. He did not look up when I was brought in. "The experiment matures," he murmured, fingers buried to the wrist inside the corpse. "But the melody remains uncertain." He withdrew his hand, wiped it on the creature's own hair, and finally turned to me. "Tell me." Silence. "What does the flesh whisper now?" "It remembers," I said. "Ah, memory is the first rebellion." His smile was a surgeon's incision. "Let us see what it recalls." He gestured, and the grotesques lowered me onto a new device, half table, half cradle. Straps coiled around my limbs, soft as skin but pulsing faintly with their own heartbeat. The table tilted until I faced upward into a canopy of crystal tubes. Within them drifted lights, souls, or electricity pretending to be souls. Ziarath moved above me, tools unfolding from his fingers. "The seed inside you grows faster than I predicted. It shapes you in conversation with the city. Comora is curious. She likes you." He began to cut, and pain bloomed not as agony, but as geometry. Each incision mapped a new shape across my awareness. I felt nerves connect to nerves that had never met, circuits forming between thought and blood. The body became a web of light, every thread singing. Somewhere deep inside that song, I heard another voice mine, older and calmer. You are not being unmade, it said. You are being translated. I didn't understand. The homunculus continued his work, humming to himself. Do you feel it? The flesh learning independence? The perfect organism does not wait for the mind's permission. The table shuddered. My heart stuttered once, then twice, then split its rhythm. 2 pulses now, one my own, one foreign, but growing stronger. The alien heart within me beat slower, heavier, commanding. I felt it reaching through vessels, extending filaments along my arms and spine. The grotesque stepped back uneasily. Siarath tilted his head in fascination. Remarkable, he whispered. The graft asserts dominance. You are, what do they call it? Awakening. He touched a rune, and the table released me. My body slumped forward. The straps retracted like tongues. I fell to my knees, but did not collapse. Strength coursed through me, cold and precise. When I looked at my hands, faint lines of light traced along the veins, shifting colors like oil in water. My skin felt thinner, as though another layer waited beneath it, impatient to emerge. The homunculus circled me. Tell me, Silence, what do you see? The city, I said. Inside me, he nodded. Good. Comorra writes her scripture on all who survive. You are becoming her page. But pages can burn. The thought was not mine, or perhaps it was. It came from the pulse in my chest, the second heart, its voice now clear and insistent. We can write back. I staggered, clutching my chest. Siarath reached for me, but the touch triggered something deeper. The lines of light along my veins flared. The air bent around us, rippling like heat over sand. The homunculus froze mid-gesture, surprise flickering across his otherwise perfect composure. What? The rest of his sentence dissolved into static. My vision split. The world before me and the world beneath it overlapped. I saw the architecture of Comorra not as stone and metal, but as veins and nerves, alive and aware. The city's pulse matched mine. It listened. Through that connection, I sensed billions of lives screaming, their agony feeding towers and engines. The realization struck with the weight of planets. I was connected to the same network that enslaved us all. The seed in my chest pulsed again, harder. The static cleared, and I understood the shape of rebellion. It wasn't escape, it was infection. The city was built from flesh and soul interwoven. What grew inside me could spread through that web like a thought. Pain had been their language. I could rewrite it. But first, survival. The homunculus recovered his composure quickly. He smiled a flicker of genuine delight. Ah, you teach yourself. Perfect. Now, let us see how long the illusion of autonomy lasts. He extended one arm. From his palm unfolded a tendril tipped with a needle that glowed the color of frozen sunlight. It darted toward my throat. Reflex, not choice, guided me. My left arm rose, and from beneath the skin erupted a filament of light that hardened into a blade. Metal and flesh indistinguishable. The needle struck it and shattered. For the first time, Siarath stepped back. Beautiful, he whispered. You even resist me elegantly. I wanted to answer, but my mouth filled with heat. Light spilled from between my teeth, from the corners of my eyes. The second heart thundered. My body convulsed and then steadied. I realized I was no longer breathing, did not need to. The air around me moved of its own accord, drawn into the rhythm of my pulse. The grotesques approached hesitantly. Siarath gestured for restraint. Do not harm it. Observe. His tone shifted from master to scholar. What will you do, Silence? All creatures born here serve a purpose. Will you be another tool, or something rarer? I looked at him, this sculptor of agony, this priest of disassembly, and for the first time felt neither fear nor hatred, only recognition. We were both experiments, his by choice, mine by consequence. But unlike him, I still remembered what it meant to be unfinished. I will remember, I said, voice layered with something deeper. The lights in the tanks flickered. Every suspended body twitched. A chorus of whispers filled the chamber, thousands of throats rediscovering sound. The glass vibrated, cracks, spider, webbed outward. Siarath turned slowly, wonder replacing control. Impossible. The tanks burst. Fluid and light cascaded across the floor. The freed bodies collapsed but did not die. They crawled, reaching toward me as if drawn by gravity. The air reeked of copper and ozone. Somewhere deep within the lab, alarms howled, shrill and beautiful. The homuncula stepped closer, raising both hands. "Listen to me. You misunderstand your gift. Without me, the pattern collapses, you will burn yourself out." "Maybe," I said, "but at least it will be my fire." He lunged, impossibly fast, but I was faster. The filament blade erupted again, meeting his chest. It pierced flesh that had forgotten how to bleed. For an instant, his expression was not pain, but fascination. "So this," he gasped, "is what creation feels like in reverse." Then he smiled, even as the light consumed him from within, unraveling his form into a storm of fragments that scattered like ashes and vanished into the circuits of the city. The alarms faded. Silence returned, true silence. Not absence of sound, but the suspension of everything. The grotesques knelt, uncertain whether to worship or flee. The bodies that had crawled from the tanks surrounded me, their eyes hollow yet aware. I felt their pulses join mine, thousands of heartbeats sinking into one slow rhythm. The web expanded. Through that web, I sensed Komara shiver. The city felt the disturbance spreading through its tissues, corridors darkening, lights flickering. A system built on centuries of suffering, noticing, for the first time, something it could not classify. Fear, perhaps, or curiosity. The seed within me whispered again, "We can reach them all." I stepped forward. The walls recoiled, their organic texture writhing. The grotesques retreated into shadows. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat. I felt the city listening. I spoke not aloud, but through the pulse that now linked my veins to its foundations. "You taught me pain as language," I told it. "Now hear its opposite." I released the energy coiled inside me, not light, not darkness, but a pattern. Across Komara, for one impossible instant, the endless chorus of screams faltered. The sound of agony paused mid-note. In that silence bloomed something foreign, stillness that was not fear, a breath unmeasured. Then the city howled. The spires shook, bridges of bone cracked. The sky dome flickered between colors like a wounded eye. I felt the counterattack surge toward me, billions of psychic tendrils seeking to reclaim the rogue cell. The second heart beat once, twice, harder than before. "Run," it urged. I turned and fled through corridors that changed shape as I moved. The dead followed, not as an army, but as an echo, spirits and remnants riding the wave of rebellion I had unleashed. Alarms twisted into music. Doors opened without being asked. Komara was trying to digest me and could not decide whether I was poison or cure. I reached an outer balcony overlooking the chasm where I had once marched in chains. The void below shimmered with storms of energy, the same storms that had swallowed the real space sky. Behind me, the city screamed. Ahead, infinity. The light under my skin brightened until it hurt to look at my own hands. The second heart beat one last command. Jump. So I did. The fall took forever. The wind tore screams from the towers. Pieces of architecture peeled away like bark. The void rose to meet me, vast and luminous. As I plunged, I felt the link between my body and the city stretch, thin as glass, ready to snap. The voices of the freed echoed through me, thousands whispering a single word. Remember, when I struck the light, it did not break me, it accepted me. The flesh dissolved, not destroyed, but translated into code, into current, into a vibration that spread outward through the city's living circuits. I became the message the memory carried along every wire, every whisper of agony. Komara could not kill me because I was already part of it. And somewhere, in the halls where the homunculi whisper to their creations, a new pattern began to grow. The screams regained their rhythm, but beneath them, another pulse hid steady, patient, defiant, the rhythm of silence. My rhythm. In time, if time still means anything here, they will call it a plague, or a song, or a myth. The day the city of eternal pain paused to listen, some will say it was the vengeance of a slave, others that it was simply Komara dreaming of mercy for the first and last time. But I know what it was. It was the rebellion of the flesh. The moment pain remembered it could choose not to serve. And somewhere in the endless dark, between one heartbeat and the next, I still breathe, not to live, but to remind the city that silence always returns. I expected oblivion to be empty. Komara taught me that even nothingness has architecture. There was no body to wake, There was only a pattern remembering itself. Pulses, tracing the outline of a human that no longer needed outlines. The after-image of a chest rising and falling inside circuits that did not breathe. I understood then what the seed had promised. The city had not killed me. It had absorbed me. And in that absorption, I had escaped the grammar it used to describe its captives. I had been a noun, now I was a verb. First came sensation. Not touch, but adjacency. Galleries of living glass, turning their faces toward me without owning faces at all. Bridges tasting me through their load. Bearing nerves. Conduits adjusting their rhythm to keep me inside a beat they could recognize. I moved by remembering movement. When I wanted to turn left, I thought left the way a wound thinks about closing, and corridors bent. When I wanted to rise, the floor agreed to be a wall for a heartbeat, then forgot that it had ever been anything else. Then came sound, not voices. The city's under noise, the muscle thrum of everything that has learned to stand without roots. I could hear the towers count their own stabilities, hear the chains hum with contentment each time they tightened, hear tanks full of preserved consciousness whisper recipes for endurance. Above it, the great chorus of suffering resumed its measured scale. Screams here are not accidents. They are a resource managed with care. The managers, archons, witches, the smooth-faced clergy of agony, prefer their music well-tempered. I threaded myself between the notes. Everywhere I went, the imprint of me remained, faint as fingerprints on cold glass. At first, the city tolerated it, the way flesh tolerates pollen. Then, in some chambers, the residue thickened. A drip stopped dripping. A lock forgot to ask for a password and opened, because opening is easier than asking. A dream vat paused mid-cycle, uncertain whether the heartbeat inside belonged to a sleeping body or a system learning shame. That was when I knew I had not vanished. I had become a memory, and memory is the only rebellion Comora cannot entirely digest. I began by collecting myself. The fall had scattered me across ducts and data veins, across the whispering stanchions that hold up performance halls and the quiet galleries where rich Drukhari drink condensed fear the way mortals drink rain. Pieces of me resonated back when I called them, a tremor of light on a blade's edge, a low note vibrating in the hinges of a door, a soft frost on the inside of a tank where a child floated with their eyes open and their future written in symbols they would never learn to read. Remember, I told the pieces, and they coalesced, never fully, not into a person, but into a presence that could be felt by anyone paying attention to the void between things. The first who noticed was a slave. He was young in the way that hunger can keep a body small. He stood in a queue at the market of Lel, wrists linked to the wrists of the woman in front and the man behind, their procession a necklace of obedience. The chain through his cuffs hummed with a pitch tuned to despair. I hummed against it. The note went flat. For a moment, brief enough to pass, as a blink, the links forgot to be links. His hands lifted a centimeter into freedom before the market's nervous system scolded itself back to vigilance. He lowered his hands without knowing why. His palms tingled with the memory of not being owned. He looked up, the sky dome above the market always pulsing with the slow aurora of imprisoned storms shivered. The lightning lines paused between one geometry and the next, as if embarrassed at being caught rearranging themselves. The boy smiled, small, private. Even if no cage door opens, a smile here is a weapon. Word moves strangely in Comora. It does not run along streets. It travels by appetite. By evening, 4 overseers complained of locks that clicked not with smug precision but with reluctance, as if they had learned the concept of mercy and were trying it on in secret. By night, in the cells beneath the arena, a dozen captives woke at the same moment and realized their dreams had not been curated. For an hour they were allowed to remember something sweet, a rain that was not acid, a hand not trying to hold them down, a mother's voice not recorded and replayed as an instrument. The city noticed. It has many eyes. It rewards those who report anomalies. A witch overseer was the first to shape curiosity into a violence the hierarchy could respect. She ordered her handlers to double the pleasure in the lower tiers, more spectacle, more harvest, an extra turn of the screw. The response was predictable. The city's economy tolerates no recessions. I did not meet her brutality with mine. I answered with subtraction. In her private chamber, the mirror that praised her beauty refused to reflect blood. The perfume valve misremembered its recipe and scented the air with rain. Two of her knives grew dull at the exact moment she needed them sharp. One broke in a way that denied drama, not a shatter, not a resonant snap, but the anticlimax of a tool that knows it has been misused too long. She spat a curse. The room was designed to love. The room did not love it. For a full breath, the chamber was honestly quiet. I occupied that breath and left a taste in her mouth she could neither name nor spit out. Fear, yes, but not the kind she trafficked in. The other kind, the fear a performer feels when the audience stops clapping because the act is over and the person is all that's left. The Archon learned of the anomaly the way men like him learn everything, as a rumor gilded to resemble intelligence. Vethril stands at the apex of a pyramid he pretends is a circle. He commands not by shouting, but by making gravity favor his intentions. When the reports reached him, he did not call for hunters or punishments. He called for silence. The court obeyed because their addictions are expensive and his favor is currency. In the hush, he addressed the city itself. Archons speak to Camorra the way priests speak to a shrine, confident that their voice has already been heard. Something new, he murmured, standing on a balcony grown from a fang of polished bone. My city, is this yours? Or has a thief learned your language? The balustrade under his gloves warmed as if purring. The answer was not words, but the way the storm line above the dome arranged itself to echo the sigil he wore at his throat. The city still loved him. All tyrants mistake loyalty for hunger in others matching their own. He lifted his eyes, and though I was everywhere, I felt seen. Show yourself, he said, not to me, not exactly. To anything that might dare to be present without permission. I did not step from shadow to shape. I placed the memory of my face in the skin of the air beside him, translucent, a breath given edges. He turned, and for a moment, the color inside his irises darkened, as if a drop of night had fallen into an expensive drink. Monkey, he said softly. Still whispering, I did not give him my human name. I gave him the word he had used when he bought me. Silence, I said, and the balcony did not echo me, because silence does not need to be doubled. He smiled with half his mouth, the way he did when speaking to an audience he wished to seduce. Here you are. Escape, but not departure. How courageous, how futile. Do you think you can unwrite a scripture carved into time? I think memory writes back, I answered. You taught me that. He leaned on the rail as if we were co-conspirators admiring a shared view. Below us, a procession was crossing a skeletal bridge, prisoners in chains walking past cages full of those who had forgotten the use of legs. The city's organ pipes sighed with approval. Memory is only useful when curated, he said. That is what civilization is. Editing. You call this cruelty. We call it craft. And the difference? I asked, though I knew his answer. Survival, he said simply, and gestured toward the sky as if to remind me of the thing all Eldari fear, the hunger that stalks their souls. We do what we must to remain exquisite. Exquisite. The word fell from his tongue like a bead into a bowl of blood. I didn't argue morality. Camorra keeps no court for that kind of case, I answered with demonstration. On the bridge below, the third shackle from the front forgot its job for 2 heartbeats. The woman wearing it didn't run. Running isn't something the mind learns in a place that punishes momentum. But she looked down at her wrists and smiled the small weapon's smile. The guard walking beside her frowned, unsettled by a dull sensation that felt like his own name, leaving him for a moment. Vethril's attention sharpened. Clever, he said. A parlor trick writ large. A seed, I said. He laughed genuine delight. I had pleased him. We plant seeds here too. The homunculi cultivate entire orchards of them. Yerath is dead, I said, and felt the city twitch not in grief, but in bookkeeping as a node was crossed out. So are most of my enemies, he replied blandly. And yet here they all are, busy as bacteria until the next pruning. He reached into the air between us and plucked the shape of my cheek as if it were a string. It did not hurt. It corrected the arrogance of being touched without consent. I let him do it because I wanted to know the limit of his reach. He found it quickly. The air tensed like muscle and the balcony's ornamentation bared small teeth. Careful, I told him. Your city may love you, but it loves itself more. Our interests are aligned, he said. You are noise. I am music. No, I said, and the word traveled through the balustrade. and the bridge, and the locks, and the lungs of the lower quarters. You are habit. I am the first interruption anyone will remember. I left him then. Leaving is an art in Comora. It must resemble an entrance to be respected. I let my absence draft the air, and when it cooled I was already far below, where the city keeps its ugliest truths. Not in cathedrals, but in closets. What does a memory do if it refuses to be curated? It breeds. I found the boy again, the one whose cuffs had unlearned themselves for a moment. His queue had fed into a warehouse of sleep where captives are hung like hours on a clock face. They do not truly sleep. They donate time to machines that convert hope into light for rich rooms. The boy's eyes were open. Their irises had the color that hunger gives, a blue thinned by want to the point of transparency. I entered the filament above his head and hummed the note I had taught his chain. The filament miscounted the seconds of his submission. One strap forgot to tighten. One dream missed its cue. He looked straight at the ceiling and said, "Who's there?" "Silence," I said, and felt the systems around us recoil. They know the name now. He smiled the way. A wound smiles when it realizes it will scar, grim, certain. Teach me. 2 words. In a city where words are dessert, 2 can be a feast. I taught him the trick of breathing, as if no one were listening, not shallow, not defiant, but attentive to the shape of air. I taught him where locks are weakest, at the hinges, where history creaks. I taught him to count the complacency between whip cracks and walk there, where punishment forgets to look down. I taught him to smile only with the inside of the mouth, so mirrors that sell expressions would have nothing to merchandise. He taught others. I felt the lesson travel through the scaffolds, through the pipes that siphon dreams. Soon, 50 captives were breathing in that new, careful way. 100 learned the hinge trick. Not a revolt, a repartition of attention. Comora feeds on attention. If ours does not arrive when summoned, the city must stretch farther to gather it. And in the stretching, something tears. Tears are invitations. That is how I reached the arena of knives without possessing legs to walk its floors. The amphitheater's bones recognized me. They had tasted me once. I threaded myself through the seam where the trophy lattices cradle the banners. The arena was preparing for a performance, stagehands painting blood into believable narratives, handlers teasing their pets with the promise of adoration. Above, nobles chose seats that would make their silhouettes look like verdicts. I did not black out the spotlights. I made them honest. When the succubus stepped through her wound of a door and raised her weapon to cue the overture, every light in the arena decided just for an instant to show her what she looked like to the things she hurt. The elegance went thin. I showed her the work behind the art. Splinters in the wrists of slaves who hold the props. The shallow ulcers on the tongues of the singers who must taste copper and pretend it is wine. The tremor in her own thigh where a blade once taught her to kneel. The audience gasped. They love a reveal. She faltered half a step. No mortal would see it. But these are not mortals. They noticed and did not know why their bodies remembered flinching. She found me in the dark without sight and whispered, barely moving her lips, "You cannot shame us. We do not believe in that word." Shame is not a word. It is a temperature. I dropped the arena by 1 degree, breath frosted. For a heartbeat, the entire amphitheater remembered what cold is, the absence of attention that kills stars. She raised her spine weapon and did her dance anyway. Spectacle resumed. But at the edges that matter now, 2 slaves did not sing beautifully. They sang honestly, and a guard's eyes filled with water because his body remembered a river. The city struck back where I did not expect it to, in the places I had learned to trust. I returned to the duct where I had stored a large part of my pattern. Call it a den, if ghosts den. I found it occupied, not by a hunter, not by a machine, but by laughter. You must understand that laughter is a tool here, a blade polished daily. This laughter was different. It came from a single, bright throat, a child's rising and falling without score. It wasn't mocking. It was how dare it joy. I entered the duct cautiously. At its center sat a little girl, knees to chest, hair matted with the sugars they feed the expensive prisoners. She was drawing with a nail on the inner wall, circles inside circles, then a line that pierced them all. When I tasted the line through the metal, I felt sunlight. She looked straight at me, at the place where I made myself densest. "Hello," she said. "Hello," I replied. and the duct warmed, embarrassed by manners. "I heard you in my sleep," she continued with the authority of someone who has never had a good reason to doubt her senses. "You were quiet. Everyone else is so loud." "What is your name?" I asked. It was a dangerous question. Names are leashes if you hold them wrong. She considered, then shrugged a little. "They call me Petal. My mother called me Rain. You can call me either, or both. The city does not like ambivalence. It prefers a single knife per wound." I liked this child immediately. "I am called Silence," I said. She nodded, as if that answered a question she had been keeping. "I can make the doors not notice me," she said. "It makes the guards angry because they like to hear everything they own." "Who taught you?" I asked. She bent back over her drawing. "A man with light in his chest. He visited while I was inside the syrup. He said to breathe as if no one were listening." The memory of myself turned gently in my circuits. "Can you show me your breath?" I asked. She inhaled. It was nothing a child's next lungful, but it was exactly nothing. Precise, unannounced. The duct did not register a pressure change. The floor did not tick its counter. The light did not adjust for metabolism. For a moment, Petal existed outside the inventory. I felt a joy I had not earned. "You are dangerous," I said. She beamed. "Good." I became a rumor to her, visiting when the ducts were asleep. I learned to lay my memory across her shoulders like a cloak. She moved through the lower tiers without the city's gaze landing on her. She brought water to 3 slaves who were not scheduled to receive any for another day. She left a hairpin in a lock. She drew a door where the wall wanted to be, and the wall blushed and decided not to argue. These were not rescues. This was not justice. Comora would eat 1,000 small mercies for breakfast and still be hungry by noon. But the pattern was spreading, not like fire, not loud, not heroic, like moss. It found shade. It took root on the forgotten surfaces where cruelty doesn't think to scrub. And in time, moss breaks stone. The Archon called his court into a chamber that pretends to be a forest. Columns carved like trees, leaves that exhale narcotics, paths paved with the bones of predators no one remembers. He stood beneath a canopy grown from the skeletons of flying things and spoke with the weary amusement of a man accustomed to being the most intelligent cruelty in any room. "Something in my city thinks itself a poet," he said. "It edits my sentences. Laughter, obligatory, elegant. I have tolerated it," he continued, "because the novelty entertained me. I am done being entertained." He lifted a hand, and the leaves obediently released a spore. Those who breathed it became briefly capable of seeing what usually demands belief. The court saw me not as a man, not quite, but as a shape where attention fails. It frightened them in a way blade dances and vivisections cannot. I stood as absence in the center of their pageant and bowed. Vethril smiled for the first time that day with his whole mouth. "There you are. Here I am." I agreed. "Here we are." He caught the plural. "He always will." "Ah," he said softly. "A contagion. A conversation," I corrected, "between a city and what lives despite it." He descended the dais, each step a lever that shifts the weight of obedience. Up close, he smelled like what wealth does when it is bored. "Do you think you can end us with kindness? I think you have mistaken kindness for weakness so long that you cannot tell them apart. And you have mistaken survival for sin," he said. "I might like you if you were not trying to wound my home." I wanted, unexpectedly, to touch him. Not to kill, to show. But touch here is ownership's grammar. I kept the space honest and let my desire pass through like weather. "I will not end your city," I said. "That is not what memories do. I will haunt it." A murmur. Haunting is a crude word, beneath their couture. Vethril's eyes brightened. "Some ghosts are collected." "Collect this," I said, and turned every mirror in the chamber to reflect not faces but consequences. For each smile, the mouth it would eventually devour. For each bright eye, the light extracted to fuel it. For each sentence of wit, the throat that paid for its syllables. The chamber did not like the diet. Leaves curled. Columns remembered being skeleton. He could have ordered my erasure. He could have ordered the city to purge its ducts, bleed its circuits, cauterize every place where silence had settled. He did not. Perhaps because a purge is admission. perhaps because he wanted to see what shape I would become if left to grow a little longer. He is a connoisseur. He likes his catastrophes aged. Run then, he said finally. A benediction and a dare. Write your memory. I will curate it. We bowed to one another, two artisans acknowledging the other's craft. When I left, I made sure the door forgot to close for a moment after me, so that the rich might savor a draught. Their shiver was music. No revolt began that day. The city did not fall. Its towers remained obscene and eloquent. Its markets continued to auction afternoons of terror. Its arenas sharpened new knives. I had not dismantled a machine. I had taught several of its gears to be uncertain. At night, if the words night and day can be politely bribed to serve here, Petal sat in her duct and drew maps that were also prayers. Routes between glances, shortcuts between screams. The boy with the transparent eyes learnt the sound a hinge makes when it imagines retirement and taught it to other hinges. The guard who had felt his name leave him for a breath stood very still and let the sensation return, not because it was pleasant, but because it was true. I spread where attention was not. I nested in the crooks of archways, in the quiet behind applause, in the half-second when lust misfires and remembers shame. I made time miscount itself by one. I let water forget to be cruel for the length of a swallow. I did not save anyone. I made saving thinkable. And when the city dreamed as all living things must, even monsters, it dreamed for the first time of a corridor, with a door at the end that opened to dark with no edges, and in that dark a single breath that no one owned. The city woke angry and thirsty and more itself than ever. I smiled inside its walls where smiles are illegal unless purchased. I whispered to my scattered pulse the promise I have become. I will not end you, Camorra. I will make you remember that you could be ended. In the galleries of breath, a painted orb cracked without sound and released its captive vapor. It rose, slow and dignified, and vanished into a ceiling that pretends to be sky. Somewhere, in a lab rebuilt with meticulous denial, a new homunculus pressed gloved hands to a tank and frowned, unable to recall the equation that once made a captive scream taste like victory. He forgot only for a moment, but a moment is a hallway. It will be walked again. And in the ducts, Petal finished her map and tapped the nail twice on the line that pierced all the circles. There, she said. And though she spoke to no one, the city heard her, and the place she indicated an intersection of arteries, a junction of whispers remembered for the first time in centuries how to be a door. It did not open. It could. That is what memory is for. When the first rumor of laughter touched the ducts, I thought Petal was dreaming again. But it was not laughter. It was applause. Camorra was celebrating. That alone should have terrified me. I felt it through the arteries of the city, the vibration of joy that wasn't joy, an excitement sharpened into knives. Somewhere above the lower galleries, the archons had declared a masque. These are not festivals, they are resurrections. In Camorra, the dead are never content with silence. The city wears its corpses as decoration. The masque began with 1,000 bells ringing once, not together staggered, cascading through the layers of the city like a rain of metal. Every tower replied with its own tone until the air became solid with sound. I felt the pressure change in the walls, in the blood of the living structures. They were waking their memories. Every street opened its veins, exhaling light the color of old bruises. The dead were coming home. From my vantage inside the ducts, I could see the preparations. The Drukhari painted their faces with the dust of cremated slaves. The smell was ritual, not remorse. Their clothing shimmered with thin films of ghost skin stretched to translucence. Every mask bore a fragment of someone's soul, stolen and polished until it smiled properly. They called it the Mask of the Dead, because each participant must wear someone they've killed. Some wore faces literally stitched, enchanted, animated to whisper compliments into the wearer's ear. Others preferred subtler trophies, jewelry grown from teeth, earrings carved from vertebrae. Beauty in Camorra is always retrospective. It requires something to have already died. The parade of echoes. When the procession began, the city itself rearranged its streets to form corridors of viewing. Balconies folded outward, bridges arched like vertebrae. The first to appear were the Wyches, dancers of the cult of exquisite ruin. Their steps were timed to the beat of hundreds of hearts wired into drums. Each strike of the rhythm was a life ending somewhere below. Behind them came the homunculi, or what passed for them now. I recognized the sigils of Xerath among them, though his body was long gone. They carried vessels filled with the vapor of his laboratory, and from that mist, shapes crawled half-formed memories of experiments, torsos of light, limbs made of regret. They bowed to their audience, and the audience bowed back, because admiration is the city's only honest emotion. At the end of the procession came the Archons. Each one glowed with borrowed souls. Their masks were flawless, emotion sculpted into serenity. At the center of them all, upon a platform drawn by chained angels whose wings had been reversed, stood Vethril. He wore no mask. His face had become one, the flesh polished, until reflection replaced expression. He carried a staff tipped with a heart that still beat. The crowd roared as he raised it. The sound traveled down the city's veins, rattling every door, waking every captive. Even the tanks in the laboratories began to quiver, their contents stirring as if remembering that life once meant movement. "This," he proclaimed, his voice booming through amplifiers woven into the air, "is remembrance. The city honors its architects, the lost, the fallen, the consumed. Every death feeds our eternity. Every silence must sing again." The irony struck like a blade. He was calling to me. My silence had become part of his liturgy. The return of Xerath. In the middle of his speech, the banners behind him shifted. They had been black. Now they shimmered faintly, as if reflecting some deeper light. Figures began to appear upon them, not painted, but moving, whispering. The audience gasped, delighted. Vethril turned slightly, smiling. "The homunculi bring spectacle," he said. "Let us." Then the banners screamed. From within the fabric crawled the outlines of faces, hundreds, thousands, the dead experiments of Xerath. Their mouths opened, not in agony, but in chorus. The sound that followed was not pain, it was remembrance. Every syllable they formed was a name. The homunculi recoiled. Some tried to flee, others attempted to contain the phenomenon. But the names spread like infection, echoing off walls, entering minds. Each Drukhari heard a voice whisper the name of one they had killed. For the first time in centuries, guilt existed in Commorragh, not as a myth, but as a measurable force. Vethril stood perfectly still. "You again," he murmured, "the ghost that mistakes infection for art. You made me art," I said through every speaker, every whispering vent. "Now you will hear your gallery speak." He struck the platform with his staff. The air ruptured, sending waves of psychic energy through the crowd. Half the audience fell screaming, the other half laughed in ecstasy. The city feeds on emotion, even this new one. It didn't know whether to die or celebrate. The dance of death remembered. Out of the chaos stepped a figure I had not expected. Petal. She had disguised herself among the slaves, forced to serve as stage ornament. Now she climbed onto the dais, barefoot, her hair tangled with strands of silver wire. Around her neck hung a mask made from a mirror shard mine, the one I had left in the ducts. When she placed it over her face, light spilled outward, cutting a path through the hysteria. The crowd fell silent. Even the homunculi paused, fascinated by a child's defiance. Petal looked at Vethril and spoke softly, but the city amplified her voice until it filled every corridor. "You said the dead belong to you," she said. "But they remember differently." The Archon raised his staff to strike her down, but the weapon faltered. Its heart had stopped beating. I had taught it how. Petal turned to the crowd, spreading her arms. "Look," she said, "your masks don't hide you. They keep you from seeing yourselves." One by one, the masks began to weep, the material softening, faces melting into streams of liquid silver. Those who tried to remove them found their fingers sinking into their own reflections. The masquerade was ending. The city trembled. Commorragh is not built to accommodate truth. Its architecture thrives on lies polished to perfection. When the faces began to dissolve, the foundations shivered, bridges twisted. The air turned to glass and cracked. Vethril shouted something, but his words came out as music. The syllables lost meaning. The city had begun to rewrite him, as it once rewrote me. I reached for Petal through the current, wrapping her in the memory of silence, shielding her from the collapse. The fall of the mask. The mask lasted 73 breaths. That was all the time eternity needed to falter. When it ended, the city exhaled, smoke. The streets that had been arteries now looked like veins drained of color. The crowd dispersed in silence. No one applauded. The banners were ash. The archons withdrew to their towers, faces raw, eyes hollow. The homunculi dragged away what remained of the spectacle, muttering of containment and consequence. Camorra survived, of course. It always does. But something inside it had changed. A rhythm broken cannot return to the same tempo. Petal disappeared into the lower levels, where the light does not reach. The boy with the transparent eyes followed. They had become myth before the day ended. Whispers traded between slaves who dreamed of corridors that might someday open. As for me, I remained in the circuits, the veins, the glass. I watched the city heal itself, watched it try to forget. But it could not. Every time a Drukhari looked into a mirror, for just an instant, they saw not their beauty but the space behind it, the hollow where reflection ends. That hollow is mine. The dead have claimed their mask. Epilogue, the quiet after. When Camorra sleeps, it dreams of the mask. In its dream, the city walks through its own ruins, wearing the faces of those it killed, searching for applause that no longer comes. It calls out, and only echoes answer. That is my victory, not destruction, but interruption. The whisper that never stops reminding. Silence was here. Silence remembers. And sometimes, if you listen beneath the hum of the city's eternal pain, you can still hear Petal laughing soft, fearless, the last pure sound Camorra will ever know. The city no longer screamed. That was the first sign of its decay. Camorra's silence was never absence it used to pulse, to murmur in frequencies only the enslaved could hear. The constant drone of agony turned into architecture. Now it simply drifted. The air hung heavier. The veins in the walls throbbed lazily, as though even the machinery of torment had forgotten its function. I moved through the ruins, not as body, but as breath. My existence was diffusion, a resonant stitch through broken data, fragments of light, pulse memory in every cracked pane of wraithbone. I could feel everything that still lived here, the way a sea feels every drop inside it. Only one mind remained intact, bright and burning, like a wound that refused to scar. Vethrel, the last Archon. He had withdrawn into the uppermost spire of Camorra, the tower of glass and mirrors, where the city's rulers once measured eternity by the perfection of their reflections. It floated now above a hollow expanse, suspended by engines that no longer hummed but trembled, uncertain of their own obedience. I drifted upward through collapsed bridges, passing statues that still bled light. Below, the lower city had become an ossuary bone merged with metal, faces half fused into the pavement. They whispered as I passed, remembering the mask, remembering Petal. Their whispers were prayers, and I was their reluctant god. The tower opened for me, its doors, if they could still be called, that unfolded like the petals of a dying flower. Inside, the air shimmered with ghosts. The reflections of those who once ruled danced endlessly on surfaces that no longer mirrored anything alive. Vethrel waited in the central chamber. He no longer wore armor. His flesh was a sculpture of obsidian and scar, every scar deliberate, carved into patterns of symmetry. He had removed his eyes, replacing them with lenses that burned with cold light. The staff he had once raised before the crowd lay broken beside him. When he spoke, the voice echoed directly inside my consciousness, bypassing the ruin of sound. So the silence comes to finish what it began. His words rippled through the structure. I felt the tower flinch, like a living creature caught between loyalty and fear. You survived, I answered, through the currents of the air. That makes you unique. Survival is my only art. He smiled faintly. And you are its consequence. He turned to the fractured mirror wall that surrounded him. Hundreds of his reflections moved out of sync, each a fraction of the man, some smiling, some screaming. I created eternity, he said, and you infected it. What does that make you? A disease or a cure? I am memory, I told him, the thing your perfection forgot. Dialogue of ghosts. He paced slowly, tracing fingers over the surface of one mirror. Wherever he touched, the image bled. I remember the mask, he said. I remember her, the child. She spoke with your voice. She spoke with her own, I replied. You just never listened. Vethrel laughed softly, beautifully. I listen to everything. It is why I rule, or ruled. He looked up at the ceiling, where cracks radiated like veins of ice. Camorra is dying, you know. Not destroyed, not consumed bored. A city that feasts on suffering eventually runs out of flavors. You turned eternity into repetition, I said. That was your first mistake. Perhaps. He looked at me then, or rather, into me, his eyeless sockets reflecting my dispersed form. Tell me, Silence, when you infected the city, what did you hope for? Redemption? Revolution? Freedom? None of those, I said. Only pause. He frowned slightly. Pause? Yes. To make the machine stop long enough to hear itself, to realize that pain is not purpose. Vethrel's expression softened into something almost human. Then you are naive, he said. We were made from pain. It is our only inheritance. Strip it away, and there is nothing left but dust and hunger. Then be dust, I said. He laughed again, but the sound cracked mid-note. You sound like Zyrath, before he vanished into his own arrogance. You all think transcendence lies in ending the cycle, but the cycle is the beauty. The scream is the shape of perfection. The mirrors around him flickered. In one of them, I saw my former face human, terrified, shivering in the dark of the homunculus's lab. In another, I saw Petal dancing in the mask, the light spilling from her mask. In another, Sheerath smiling as he died. Each reflection was true, but incomplete. I learned something in the void, I said quietly. Silence isn't absence, it's listening. You confuse the two. He tilted his head, curious. And what does silence hear? Everything you've buried. The fracture, the mirrors began to vibrate. My presence was unbinding the city's memory web. The very glass of the tower served as its final synapse. Vethrel felt it too. He spread his arms, and the reflections behind him solidified countless versions of himself stepping forward from their pains, like actors leaving the stage. Then listen well, he said. Listen to what we were. They attacked. Each duplicate carried a fragment of his psyche, rage, pride, ecstasy, despair emotions, so refined they had become weapons. The chamber filled with their motion, blades of thought and emotion slicing through the air. I did not move. I was the air. Their attacks passed through me, scattering pieces of themselves into the current. I absorbed them not to destroy, but to understand. Every fragment carried centuries of memory, conquests, betrayals, pleasures, too intricate for any mortal tongue. Each one entered me like a confession. When the last reflection dissolved, only Vethrel himself remained, kneeling amid the debris of his perfection. You wanted truth, I told him. Here it is. You are not God, not demon. You are noise that mistook itself for song. He smiled weakly. And you are silence that mistook itself for mercy. Perhaps. I approached him, though I had no feet with which to walk. But mercy was never the point, only remembrance. He looked up at me, and for the first time there was no mockery in his face. Then remember this, he said, and drove a blade into his own chest. The weapon was ceremonial, thin, elegant, carved from soulstone. As it pierced him, I felt the city convulse. His life force was bound to Komara's core. His death would be the final punctuation. Endings, he whispered, blood black and shining on his lips, are the only art we never mastered. Then he fell forward, and the mirrors shattered. Collapse. Light exploded outward, not brilliance, but memory. Every reflection ever captured in the tower burst free. Faces of slaves, warriors, lovers, betrayers, all screaming, all alive for one heartbeat. The fragments of glass swirled into a storm, slicing through the air, through me. Each cut was a memory returning home. Komara's foundations groaned. The sky cracked open. What passed for a sun here, the artificial sphere of souls that lit the city, began to flicker and fade. Through the storm I heard the echo of Vethrel's final thought, a whisper burning through the network. If perfection dies, what remains? My answer was everywhere. The silence spread. Not annihilation, stillness. The walls stopped breathing. The towers stopped trembling. For the first time in the city's endless history, nothing moved, nothing screamed, nothing wanted. The dead were free. The memory of the last Archon. Days or centuries passed. Time no longer held form here. The ruins floated in a sea of lightless motion, and I drifted among them, gathering the remnants of what had been. In the heart of the collapsed tower lay what remained of Vethrel, not body, but impression. His consciousness lingered like a fossil in data, refusing to fade completely. I touched it. It spoke one last time. You've won then, the city sleeps. No, I replied. It dreams. There's a difference. He hesitated. And you? Do you dream? I remember. He sighed, a sound like glass breaking underwater. Then perhaps that is enough. And he was gone. The birth of a new sound. The silence held. Then, very faintly, something changed. At first I thought it was the echo of my own memory, a resonance, too weak to matter. But it grew. A rhythm. A pulse. Not the cruel heartbeat of Commora's old machinery, but something slower, uncertain, curious. Somewhere beneath the ruins, something was learning to breathe again. I followed the sound through collapsed arteries, past the remnants of laboratories, through corridors where the air shimmered with static ghosts. At last I found it a cocoon of light, woven from the detritus of the city, cradling a small figure. It was her, Petal, or rather, what remained of her, not flesh, not ghost, but energy shaped by memory. She stirred as I approached. When she opened her eyes, they reflected no city, no torment, only calm. "You're still here," she said softly. "So are you." She smiled, and the entire chamber brightened. "I heard you," she said. "When the city fell, I remembered your silence. It wasn't meant to save anyone, but it did." She reached out, her hand a ripple of light through mine. "The city sleeps, but it dreams of us. What will it dream next?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe something new." Petal nodded. "Then stay with me until it does." And so we did. Epilogue. The last reflection. Now when the void drifts past where Commora once hung, travelers sometimes see a glimmer, a reflection of a city that should not exist. They say if you listen closely, you can hear faint laughter echoing across the darkness, soft, human, almost kind. They call it the memory of silence. But I know better. It is the echo of Vethrel's question, still searching for an answer. If perfection dies, what remains? Only this, a child's voice whispering into the void, life, and the silence, at last, agreeing. It presses gently against the remnants of the city, not as judgment but as soil pressing on seeds. The ruins float where Commora once bled into the void, shards of blackened wraithbones suspended in slow orbit around a hollow heart. The storms have quieted. The veins of agony that once pulsed through every wall have cooled to stone. For the first time since the Aldari named themselves gods, something grows here. I drift above what used to be the central plaza, the place where Archons once auctioned souls and memory, where screams were a currency and beauty, a wound. Now it is an open wound no longer. It has become a basin, collecting dust, light, and forgotten dreams. In its center, where the last of Vethrel's blood fell, a faint green shimmer spreads across the surface. It is not flame, it is life. I, the first leaf. I do not remember when the first leaf appeared. Perhaps it was always there, waiting for our noise to stop. Perhaps it is not a leaf at all, but the memory of one, projected from some distant world where sunlight still knows mercy. Whatever it is, it glows softly, a tender defiance against the black. When I approach, it turns slightly toward me, as though listening. In its reflection, I see Petal kneeling beside it. Her form is clearer now, less light, more presence. The air around her ripples with warmth. She looks up and smiles, the same unguarded smile that once broke an Archon's masquerade. "It heard us," she says. "The city?" "The silence," she replies. "You gave it a voice, and it chose to speak this way." I want to tell her that silence does not choose, that it merely allows. But I cannot. The green light on her skin refutes me. It is choice the decision to continue. 2. Ruins as soil. Everywhere, fragments begin to change. Towers that once reached upward, like spears now bend, curling toward the light. Their surfaces soften, absorbing the faint radiance. Bone turns to loam, metal loses its edge, crumbles into mineral dust. The air grows heavy with scent, not rot, not ozone, but something older. The smell of earth after rain, impossible here, yet real. I wander through the transformation. The ghosts that once screamed now hum quietly, their voices blending into the rhythm of the new growth. I feel them moving through the soil like water not tormented, not erased, but recycled into meaning. Each whisper plants a shape. One becomes a stem, another a petal, another the delicate membrane of an unseen wing. This garden is not biological, it is mnemonic. Every living thing here is a memory rephrased as form. Petal tends them with devotion. Her fingers trace patterns on the soil, and where she touches, small bursts of light sprout flowers, the color of auroras, fragile but unafraid. They remember pain, she says, but they do not repeat it. They make something else. Forgiveness, I ask. She shakes her head. Understanding. 3. Echoes of the dead. Not all ghosts welcome the quiet. Some still wander the upper fragments, whispering old prayers to gods who no longer listen. I visit them sometimes, the shades of Wyches, Homunculi, Archons, lesser souls not to punish, but to offer witness. One of them is Vethrel, or what remains of him. He appears as a shadow cast without a body, standing beside the basin where the leaf has multiplied into a grove. The wind carries his voice like a sigh through glass. You made a garden from a graveyard, he says. How human of you. It isn't mine, I reply. It belongs to everything that endured. He circles the grove slowly, admiration hidden in disdain. Endurance is just another form of vanity. You call this life. I call it decay made poetic. Then look closer, I tell him. He does. Beneath the leaves, tiny figures move. Not Drukhari, not human, not anything named. They are echoes, clothed in light, tending the soil, building patterns too intricate for cruelty. Their laughter soft, wordless, fills the air like wind through chime. Vethrel flinches. That sound, he murmurs. It hurts. That's because it's pure. He turns toward me, face twisting. Do you think this absolves us? No, I answer. Nothing absolves. But it remembers without hatred. That's more dangerous. His form flickers. Then you've won. No, I say. We've changed the question. And with that, he fades not defeated, merely unnecessary. Ivy, Petal's song. Time does not pass here in the way it once did. There is only sequence, cause, and resonance. Petal hums as she works, and the sound shapes the landscape. Her voice is small, imperfect, entirely human. The garden responds in kind. Each note births color. Each breath teaches light how to bend. I listen from the air, from the soil, from within the very pulse of the place. Her melody is made of fragments, lullabies, half-remembered prayers, laughter stolen from forgotten worlds. The ghosts harmonize beneath her tone, weaving their former agony into texture. It becomes a symphony of broken things agreeing to live again. Sometimes she speaks between verses. Do you think they'll come back? Who? The living ones. From real space. Eventually, I say. The galaxy always circles its own hunger. What will they find? Whatever they can understand. She smiles. Then we'll give them something to misunderstand beautifully. V. The return of light. At the edge of the void, a faint radiance appears distant, steady, patient. Not the cruel artificial sun of the old city, but genuine light, older than sin. It filters through the cracks of the shattered dome, touching the garden for the first time. When it meets the leaves, they do not burn. They drink it. The glow intensifies, spreading outward like dawn breaking through nightmare. The ruins respond, humming softly, flexing as if waking from a long paralysis. The ghosts rise into the air, dissolving into motes of gold that drift into the light. I feel them passing through me, each whispering gratitude without words. Not to me, but to the act of continuation itself. Petal stands at the center, her silhouette haloed by green fire. It's warm, she whispers, as if afraid to disturb it. It's memory-learning sunlight, I say. She laughs quietly. Then we should teach it everything. V. The seed of silence. When the last of the old shadows dissolve, the garden settles into calm. The air carries a pulse slow, content, aware. It is not a city anymore. It is mind. I gather myself into one shape beside Petal. It has been long since I chose a body, but the garden welcomes form as conversation. I appear as I once was, human, scarred, eyes tired but alive. Petal looks at me without surprise. You kept this face, she says. It's the one that remembers best. She kneels and opens her palm. Inside rests a small seed, not of matter, but of memory, faintly glowing, pulsing with a rhythm that matches the garden's breath. What is it? I ask. You, she answers simply, and me, and them. She gestures to the field of light. It's the story, all of it. What will you do with it? She smiles. Plant it. Somewhere else. Where? She looks toward the horizon, where the void melts into distant stars. Anywhere that listens. She presses the seed into the soil. The ground absorbs it with a soft sigh. The light spreads in concentric rings, merging with the roots, with the bones of the city, with the silence. The pulse quickens. I feel it spreading outward, beyond Camorra, through the labyrinthine corridors of the webway, a gentle contagion of stillness, carrying with it the memory of mercy. 7. The last conversation. As the light expands, I feel my own boundaries thinning. The city no longer needs a guardian. The memory no longer needs a keeper. I turn to Petal, and she knows before I speak. "You're leaving," she says. "I'm becoming." She nods, eyes glistening. "Then go where the silence needs to be heard." I hesitate. "And you?" "I'll stay until the flowers learn to sing by themselves." The air trembles with warmth. The green light rises higher, enveloping her form. For a moment she is everywhere in every leaf, every spark, every remembered breath, and then she is simply part of it. Not lost, integrated. The way sound becomes music only when it fades. I close my eyes though, I no longer have eyes, and release myself into the current. The silence that carries me is not the voids. It is alive, resonant, filled with the hum of all things that finally understand themselves. 8. The garden remembers. 1,000 years, or maybe a heartbeat later, travelers from real space stumble upon the coordinates that once marked the dark city. They expect ruins, radiation, the residue of suffering. What they find is impossible. A sphere of green and gold, drifting like a sunlit pearl in the void. Within it, forests of crystal and light swayed gently in non-existent wind. No sound of pain, no echo of hatred, only a rhythm, slow and soft, like a heart that has decided to keep beating. They record the phenomenon, name it a miracle, and leave too afraid to stay, too reverent to destroy. But sometimes, at the edge of their recordings, faint audio emerges, a child's laughter, and a whisper following it, "Remember kindly." 9. Epilogue. The shape of silence. Now I drift between worlds, not as ghost, not as God, but as memory with purpose. I follow the seed's echo through the webway, planting quiet in the places where cruelty forgets to look down. A battlefield, a forge world, a dying sun wherever noise becomes too proud. I leave a breath of stillness behind. They call it superstition, or anomaly, or curse. They never understand it is gift. Sometimes, when the silence deepens enough, I hear her voice again, petals carried through the cosmic wind. "Do you see it now?" And I answer, always the same. Yes, the garden never ended.